So our next topic is changing capabilities during retirement. And the focus groups provided insights about this. And one of the insights was that for many of the people, it was like, well, you don't know when it's going to happen. I'll worry about it when it happens. Now, for all of us that are involved in the insurance business, it's like that's the opposite of, it's like of risk protection. We mentioned the gaps in knowledge. We did some work on changing situations in 2008 and found that the majority expected some limitations, and about half expected they would spend more with the limitations. And that said, we have a big opportunity. So last year, our report focused on what's likely to change and how are we planning for it. And there's several data tables in here. There's more in that report. And in the full study, which is available on the website, there's even more about what do people think is likely to change. Get some insight into this. And a quarter of retirees expect that they will never be physically unable to work or never less able to move around. And it's usually like, what? I mean, it's like they're, and this is about the same thing as another kind of denial. If you ask people, I think we mentioned it in long-term care yesterday, well, a lot of people are going to have long-term care, but guess what? It's not going to be me. Or you do performance evaluations, and every single person is above average. It's the same thing here in terms of people thinking about planning. And over half of retirees and 2 in 5 pre-retirees expect they'll never be able to lose the ability to manage their money. And I'm going to just go through the changing abilities over time. I'm going to just go through the last line of data on this page because, we've a lot of data here. The pre-retirees, 25% said that less than 20 years into retirement, I'll be less able to manage my money. And another 36% said, after 20 years in retirement, that'll happen to me. And 38% said, never going to happen to me. But the retirees, they're only 12% said within 20 years I'll be less able to manage my money. 33% said it'll happen, but more than 20 years out. 54% said not going to happen. Now, if people start having cognitive difficulties, this is a huge issue. It's a huge issue, too, in terms of their being vulnerable to fraud when they start having difficulties. And this is the reason I pointed to this particular data is I thought this one might be particularly interesting to you all as you think about some of these issues. Then we ask another series of questions about how, if they thought about different kinds of changes and if they were planning for them. We found that a majority have considered how they might respond to major life changes, but too few had made specific plans. And, for example, if we look at the third row of data in this here, you were no longer able to drive. Well, of the retirees, 19% had considered and made plans, but 47% had considered but not made plans. So very few people had made plans, contingency plans, how they were going to think about this, and even fewer pre-retirees. Again, this is just a sample, what we've got here. You're less able to do household chores. You were mentally no longer able to work, less able to drive, less able to do caregiving. We ask a lot more items than that, and that detailed data is there. Okay, I'm now going to switch to more about planning for retirement and financial planning. And I'm going to give you some little overview. For many, as we said, short-term cash flow is the focus, and the method of dealing with shocks is mañana, when they happen. Consistent with past research, the planning horizon for both retirees and pre-retirees continues to be only 10 years, And these are 2013 survey results. We're doing 2015 this summer, with roughly 1 in 10 saying they don't plan ahead, and about 3 in 10 saying they haven't thought about it. Insurance products, and I know you'll be interested in this, both annuities and long-term care are not very high on their list of risk management techniques. They think reducing expenses, saving more, is how you manage risks. I think there's a huge opportunity for people to understand more about both the pros and the cons of the products, but what are these products and what can they do for you? Also, in the first round of those new focus groups we were last week, some of the people had long-term care insurance. The general feeling about annuities, and of course there's confusion about payout annuities versus deferred annuities, they thought poorly image-wise of them. So there's a lot of opportunity. Many don't have a plan. Professionals, we think, actuaries, and probably a lot of you think you get to retirement, you have a certain amount of money, you're going to need that money to live on, you make a plan to spend down the money. That's not how the people were thinking, and this is one of the things that really led us to wanting to do these new groups. They thought, we'll just keep the money for emergencies and later needs, and we spend our daily income. But they don't think that the required minimum distributions, a lot of them, they don't think spending that is the same as spending down the money. So we also tried to ask them what kind of expenses they thought could be planned for last time. I've given you more quotes. I'm going to share a quote with you. Things change. A financial plan is only as good as long as it lasts. That was from a male from the Chicago focus group. A female in Chattanooga. Another thing is I control my own finances. And if I see something has gone up, I will cut down somewhere else. I don't worry about it. I just live one day at a time, be happy, and go on. A male from Chicago. You never know, really, when enough is enough. You don't. You can consult or you can talk to people and advisors or whatever, but that's just opinions. So back to some of the survey data. Except for day-to-day expenses, few think planning for key issues is very possible. And the last line on this chart is expenses associated with living longer than you thought you would. Pre-retirees think it's very possible to plan for that, 18%. 56% say somewhat possible. The rest don't think it's possible. Retirees, 25% say very possible, 54% somewhat possible. But at the same time, they don't focus on lifetime products. You have the same kind of thing of changes resulting from the death of a spouse where you have insurance available. The long-term care expenses is the second line on this chart. 27% of the retirees said they thought it was very possible to plan for them, and 45% somewhat possible. Now, we had this business with having the retired widows, and many of the retired widows did not plan for the issues that arose after the death of a spouse. We have a separate sample, and we have a battery of questions. And, for example, I'm going to just take the first one. Available assets and income. To what extent have you and your spouse partner planned for the following, or we asked the people possible to plan? Well, pre-retirees said 62% said they'd plan. Retirees, 79% said they'd planned, but then, and these were only married couples in this case that we looked at, but of the actual widows, it was down to 62%. And all of these questions, the number of retirees that said they did it versus the number of widows that said it had happened, the widows was less. So that was interesting. So we know that the focus group participants are trying to maintain their asset levels throughout retirement. They're trying to live on interest, dividends, and capital gains, as well as Social Security if they have a pension income. They generally rejected the idea of having a plan for spending down their money, even though they might be willing to spend their RMDs, or they might be withdrawing money and spending it as they go, which is why we're doing the long-term this part of why we're doing these focus groups with long-term retirees now. Most believe that exposure to equities, that investing in stocks should be reduced as people aged. There was concern about financial costs later in life, particularly healthcare costs. A lot more concern about healthcare than long-term care. Inflation often caused financial pressure, but they did say, well, spending changes. They want to remain in their house and not use the equity in their home, and most of them rejected the idea of reverse mortgages. So my little bit of summary, addressing the issues, I'm going to share with you sort of my observations and then a little more about what you all might do. I think these gaps in knowledge are a critical issue, and wherever there's gaps in knowledge about retirement, if you're working on insurance products, I would make you a reasonable wager that there's similar gaps in knowledge, that you could guess. You'd have to go out and confirm for sure, and other people might be doing this research. But thinking that, there might be similar gaps in knowledge, I would think there probably are. The risk protection gaps is a real problem, and that absolutely applies to insurance. And you think about, well, fire insurance, everybody has that, but why? Because the people that hold the mortgages, you have to have fire insurance, and you're required to have it. Retirees, and people, they're used to having certain insurance, but not others. Retirees hope for continuity, and then they adjust to change when it happens. Spending is usually maintained as long as possible, but inflation, you can lead to reductions. Activities are maintained as long as possible, but people notice increasing difficulty. The focus group participants didn't really think about retirement as having distinct changes, phases where things would change, whereas we on the committee tended to think about that. There wasn't really any planning for loss of cognitive abilities, and not much expectation of it showed up. And there was not much planning for the financial consequences of aging. So, what does that mean? What does that mean to insurance departments? We think that insurance departments could advocate for and try to promote greater risk awareness and greater understanding of risks. And in that regard, one of the publications that we have on the website is a book called Managing Post-Retirement Risks, A Guide to Retirement Planning. This publication gives a wide range of risks, and for every risk, a little overview of the risk, a little discussion of, is it something you can predict, or how could you predict it? What are a few of the generic types of strategies you can manage it, and some comments to it. So we think that might be helpful. And it's designed for professionals or for the informed consumer that wants to dig into it. It's not a very simplistic thing. Public education, there's really a need. There's a lack of retirement planning savvy, risk, and product knowledge. And there might be potential for literature and tools. I think if you could teach people about the variability and the potential length of long life, that, you might be that person that lives to age 100. There are issues with regard to advisors and advice, and there's some other work that the committee has done about advice in the middle market and employers. There's a report that's enlisted on that page, and another one is coming. Product regulation, some of our observations are that products at times may be hard to understand, may not be considered when they should be, and depending on the types of products, they may be easier or harder to compare. If you can help people compare, and we know you deal with a limited part of the total retirement space, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. And where it can happen, competitive purchasing is valuable. A little more background in an appendix about this work, and I'm very pleased to have had the chance to present it to you today, and looking forward to the Q&A after the other presentations.